Hey everyone, I need to get this off my chest. And honestly, I'm hoping someone out there can relate to what I've been through. I'm 26, and I just survived what I can only describe as a corporate nightmare that somehow ended with the most satisfying justice I've ever witnessed. So picture this, it's a typical Tuesday morning. I'm sitting at my desk with my third cup of coffee, and I'm staring at an email that just made my blood boil. The subject line: urgent, client deliverable needed by EOD. And you know what time it was sent? 11:47 p.m. the night before. I mean, seriously, who does that? But let me back up a bit, because this story doesn't start with that email. It starts about 14 months ago when I landed what I thought was my dream job at this tech company called. I'm not using their real name, obviously. I'm not trying to get sued here, but trust me, this place exists, and everything I'm about to tell you actually happened. When I first walked into those sleek glass offices with their ping-pong tables and kombucha on tap, I was beyond excited. Fresh out of college with my marketing degree, ready to take on the world, you know. The salary was decent, the benefits looked good on paper, and during my interview they kept talking about work-life balance and collaborative culture. Red flags. What red flags? I was 25 and invincible. My manager's name was Hunter, and yes, that should have been a warning sign right there. Hunter was one of those guys who wore expensive suits but somehow always looked disheveled, like he'd slept in his car. He had this habit of running his hands through his hair when he talked, which left it sticking up in all directions. But hey, I figured everyone has their quirks, right? The first few weeks were actually pretty normal. I was learning the ropes, getting to know my teammates, settling into the rhythm of corporate life. My team was small but tight-knit. There was this incredibly sweet woman in her early 30s who'd been there for about 3 years, David, our senior developer who was basically a genius with code, and a couple of other folks who rotated in and out of our projects. But then something shifted. I can't pinpoint exactly when it happened, but suddenly everything became urgent. Every project was critical. Every deadline was non-negotiable. And Hunter started using this phrase that still makes my eye twitch: we need to move at the speed of business. At first, I bought into it. I mean, I wanted to prove myself, you know? I'd stay late, come in early, work through lunch. When Hunter would swing by my desk at 5:30 and drop another quick task that would take 3 hours, I'd just grab another energy drink and get to it. I told myself it was temporary, that once we got through this busy period, things would calm down. Spoiler alert, things did not calm down. The long hours became the norm. 60 hours a week turned into 70. 70 turned into 80. I stopped making plans with friends because I never knew when I'd actually be able to leave the office. My apartment started looking like a disaster zone because I was literally only there to sleep. I had to throw away my houseplants because I kept forgetting to water them, and let me tell you, killing a succulent takes real neglect. But the worst part? Hunter acted like this was all perfectly normal. He'd stroll into the office around 10 a.m. with his fancy coffee, disappear for 2-hour meetings, and then act shocked when we hadn't completed the impossible amount of work he'd assigned us. And he had this infuriating habit of forgetting to review our work until the next day, which meant we'd pull all-nighters for absolutely nothing. I remember one particularly brutal week where we were working on this massive client presentation. Hunter had given us 3 days to do what should have been a 2-week project. We're talking market research, competitive analysis, creative concepts, budget projections, the works. And I were practically living at the office, surviving on vending machine food and pure determination. I finally finished my section around 2 a.m. on Thursday night, or Friday morning, I guess. I was so exhausted I could barely see straight, but I was proud of the work. It was good, really good. I sent it to Hunter with a note explaining all the research I'd done and how the strategy would position our client perfectly in the market. Friday afternoon rolls around, and Hunter calls a team meeting. I'm expecting praise, maybe some feedback, you know. Instead, he looks at my presentation for exactly 30 seconds and goes, "This doesn't feel right. Can you rework the whole thing by Monday?" I just sat there like, are you kidding me right now? Did that just happen? I'd spent 18 hours on that presentation, and he dismisses it in half a minute. But what really got me was his tone. not apologetic, not even acknowledging the work I'd put in. Just casual, like he was asking me to make photocopies. That was my first real moment of clarity. This wasn't about business needs or client demands. This was about control, and possibly something else I couldn't quite put my finger on yet. The breaking point came about 6 months later, and it wasn't even about me. It was about Sweet, who'd been giving everything to this company for 3 years. She'd been putting in crazy hours just like the rest of us, but she was also dealing with some family stuff at home. Her mom was sick, and she was trying to help coordinate care while keeping up with Hunter's impossible demands. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and we were in the middle of another one of Hunter's emergency projects. Had been at her desk since 7 a.m., hadn't eaten lunch, and was visibly stressed. I could see her hands shaking as she typed, and she kept taking these deep, shaky breaths. Then it happened. She just stopped typing, put her head in her hands, and started hyperventilating. Full-blown panic attack, right there in the middle of the office. I rushed over to her, got her some water, tried to help her breathe. A couple other gathered around, everyone genuinely concerned. And where was Hunter during all this? On a phone call in his office, door closed, completely oblivious. When he finally came out and saw the commotion, you know what he said. Not, "Is she okay?" Or, "What can I do to help?" He looked annoyed and said, "She needs to learn to manage her stress better." I'm not even kidding. Those were his exact words. Like's panic attack was some kind of personal failing, not the result of months of unreasonable pressure and impossible deadlines. That's when something clicked for me. This wasn't just about demanding work schedules or poor management. There was something fundamentally wrong with the whole situation, and I was going to figure out what it was. I started paying closer attention to Hunter's patterns. When did he arrive? When did he leave? What was he actually doing during all those mysterious meetings? And the more I watched, the more suspicious things became. For someone who claimed our projects were so critical and time-sensitive, Hunter sure spent a lot of time locked in his office or mysteriously absent. He'd schedule these vague, client calls that would last for hours, always with the door closed. He'd get phone calls that would make him agitated and distracted. And he had this habit of suddenly pulling people off our team for special assignments that no one ever seemed to know the details about. I started keeping a log. Nothing fancy, just notes on my phone about when Hunter was actually present and engaged versus when he was doing his own thing. The pattern was pretty clear. Whenever we had real deadlines, real client work, real company business that needed attention, Hunter was conveniently unavailable. But here's the thing that really got my attention. Despite all our long hours and supposed dedication, our team's projects were consistently behind schedule. We were working ourselves to death, but somehow never meeting expectations. Meanwhile, Hunter always seemed to be juggling multiple urgent priorities that kept him too busy to actually manage us. I needed to know what was really going on, but I also needed to be smart about it. I wasn't about to go making accusations without proof, so I started doing some detective work. First, I talked to David, our senior developer. David's one of those quiet, observant types who notices everything but doesn't usually say much. When I casually mentioned that Hunter seemed pretty busy with non-team stuff, David just gave me this look and said, "You've noticed that too, huh?" Turns out David had been having the same suspicions. He'd been asked to do some special projects for Hunter that seemed completely unrelated to our company's work. Technical stuff that Hunter claimed was for research purposes, but never seemed to connect to anything we were actually doing. That's when David told me something that made my stomach drop. He'd been asked to set up some server space and software licenses for Hunter's research. And when he'd looked into it later, he realized the setup was being used for something that looked suspiciously like a completely separate business venture. I mean, think about it. Here's Hunter, constantly claiming our team's work is so urgent and critical that we need to sacrifice our personal lives, but he's secretly using company resources, including our time and expertise, for his own side hustle. But I needed more than suspicions and circumstantial evidence. I needed proof. This is where I probably should mention that I minored in computer science in college. Nothing fancy, but I knew enough about networks and file systems to do some digging. With David's help, and I want to be clear, we were very careful to only access things we had legitimate reasons to access. We started looking at server logs and file activity. What we found was absolutely infuriating. Hunter had been using company servers to host his personal project. He'd been using expensive software licenses that the company paid for to develop his own products. And those special assignments he kept pulling people off our team for. They were working on his stuff, not company business. But wait, it gets worse. Remember those junior developers who'd mysteriously disappeared from our team a few months back? The ones Hunter said were needed for a special client project. They were working full-time on Hunter's personal venture, on company time, getting paid by our company to build his business. The scope of it was breathtaking. We're talking hundreds of hours of employee time, thousands of dollars in server costs and software licenses, and who knows how much in opportunity cost from all the company projects that were delayed or compromised because our team was understaffed. And the most maddening part, Hunter's personal project was actually doing well, really well. While we were killing ourselves trying to meet impossible deadlines with skeleton crews, while was having panic attacks from stress, while I was working 80-hour weeks and slowly losing my mind, Hunter was building a profitable business on our backs. I spent about 2 weeks collecting evidence, server logs showing when Hunter's personal files were accessed, email threads about his side project that he'd accidentally sent to the wrong distribution list, financial records showing the company resources being used for non-company purposes, screenshots, timestamps, documentation of everything. By the time I was done, I had a folder with about 50 pages of documentation that painted a pretty clear picture of what had been happening. Now, here's where I made a smart decision. Instead of marching straight to HR with my evidence, I went to see a lawyer first. I found someone who specialized in employment law and made an appointment. The lawyer looked through everything and basically confirmed what I'd suspected. Hunter's behavior was not just unethical, it was potentially illegal. He was essentially embezzling company resources for personal gain. But more importantly for me, the lawyer explained that as an employee who discovered this, I had certain protections if I reported it properly. Armed with legal advice and a rock-solid case, I finally scheduled a meeting with our CEO and the head of HR. I didn't give them any details ahead of time, just said I had some concerns about resource allocation and team management that needed urgent attention. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. I remember walking into that conference room with my folder of evidence, and I was surprisingly calm. I'd been nervous for days leading up to it, but in that moment I just felt ready. I started by explaining the situation from my perspective, the long hours, the impossible deadlines, the impact on team morale and productivity. Then I laid out the evidence, piece by piece. Server logs, email records, documentation of company resources being used for Hunter's personal project. You know what's funny? I'd expected them to be skeptical, to question my motives, maybe even to dismiss my concerns. Instead, as I went through the evidence, I watched their expressions change from polite attention to genuine shock to what I can only describe as barely contained fury. The CEO, let's call him Mr., kept asking for more details, more documentation. He had me walk through the timeline multiple times, explaining exactly how I discovered each piece of evidence, and the HR director was taking notes like her life depended on it. By the end of the meeting, which lasted almost 2 hours, Mr. looked like he wanted to put his fist through the wall. He thanked me for bringing this to their attention and assured me that they would handle the situation immediately and appropriately. I went back to my desk feeling this weird combination of relief and anxiety. Relief that I'd finally done something about the situation, but anxiety about what would happen next. Would Hunter figure out it was me who'd reported him? Would there be retaliation? Would anything actually change? I didn't have to wait long for answers. Hunter didn't come into work Wednesday or Thursday. On Friday morning, we got a brief email from HR stating that Hunter was no longer with the company and that they were conducting a search for new team leadership. Just like that. No big announcement, no drama, no explanation. Just a quiet exit and a corporate email. The relief that washed over our team was immediate and palpable. It was like someone had lifted this crushing weight that we'd all been carrying for months. Actually cried, happy tears, she assured me. David smiled for the first time in weeks. Even the usually stoic accounting folks seemed to be walking a little lighter. But you know what the best part was? Within a week, our productivity actually improved, even though we were working normal 40-hour weeks instead of the crazy overtime schedule Hunter had imposed. Turns out, well-rested, properly managed employees actually get more done than exhausted, stressed-out ones. Who would thought? The company handled the transition really well, too. They brought in an interim manager who actually knew how to prioritize tasks and set realistic deadlines. They hired additional staff to properly support our team. And most importantly, they implemented new policies to ensure that what happened with Hunter could never happen again. About a month after Hunter's departure, Mr. called me into his office. I was nervous. Had I done something wrong? Was there fallout from the investigation? Instead, he thanked me. He explained that their internal audit had uncovered even more misuse of company resources than I'd initially documented. Hunter had cost the company tens of thousands of dollars and had put several client relationships at risk with his negligence and resource misallocation. Then came the part I wasn't expecting. Mr. offered me a promotion, not just Hunter's old position, but a newly created role as Director of Team Operations, with a significant salary increase and actual authority to implement policies that would protect employees from the kind of situation we'd been in. I accepted on the spot. That was 8 months ago, and I can honestly say it's been the best 8 months of my professional life. Our team is thriving. We're meeting deadlines without killing ourselves. We're doing better work because we have the time and resources to do it properly. And she's absolutely flourishing in her new role as Senior Project Manager. As for Hunter, well, I heard through the corporate grapevine that his personal venture didn't last long without the free company resources and employee labor he'd been stealing. Funny how that works out. But here's what I learned from this whole experience. Sometimes you have to be willing to take a stand, even when it's scary and uncertain. I could kept my head down, accepted the toxic situation, and just tried to survive until I could find another job. Instead, I chose to fight for myself and my teammates, and it made all the difference. I also learned the importance of documentation. If I hadn't kept careful records and gathered solid evidence, my complaints might have been dismissed as workplace drama or personality conflicts. But facts are facts, and when you present a clear, well-documented case, it's hard to ignore. Most importantly, I learned that toxic workplace cultures don't fix themselves. They require people to speak up, to take risks, to refuse to accept. That's just how things are as an excuse for unethical behavior. So if you're in a similar situation, if you're being exploited, if your manager is acting suspiciously, if your workplace is destroying your mental health and personal life, please know that you have options. Document everything. Seek legal advice if necessary. And don't be afraid to stand up for yourself and your colleagues. Because here's the thing, companies like to talk about values and culture and doing the right thing, but at the end of the day, they respond to evidence and consequences. When you can show them exactly how a bad manager is costing them money and putting them at legal risk, they'll act fast. And you know what? A year later, I sleep soundly every night knowing I did the right thing. Not just for me, but for David, for everyone who was suffering under Hunter's management. Sometimes justice is quiet and corporate and comes in the form of policy changes and organizational restructuring. But it's still justice. Has anyone else out there had to take down a toxic boss? I'd love to hear your stories, because I think we need to talk more openly about these experiences. The more we share, the more we empower each other to recognize the signs and take action when necessary. Thanks for listening to my story. It feels good to finally tell it in full, and I hope it helps someone out there who might be going through something similar. Remember, You're stronger than you think, and you deserve better than exploitation disguised as business necessity. Trust your instincts, document everything, and don't be afraid to fight for what's right. Sometimes the best revenge is simply exposing the truth.